welcome. Um, I'm always looking forward to my conversation with you on the other side, and I want to use the opportunity to say a very big thank you for listening, sharing, but most importantly, for the investment you're making into yourself. It's a journey that often makes sense more in retrospect. So, welcome. Today's focus is really going to be on unpacking thoughts and patterns that really often go unnoticed and deeply affect the way we see ourselves and we also see the world. Today, we will dive into negative assumptions. You know, one of the one of the old phrases I used to hear while growing up, which holds true, is um the danger of assumption. You know how you're always, when people when you're growing up, always like, I assume. No, it's so dangerous to assume. And one of my um senior friends used to always say something that has stuck with me for a very long time, and he says, when in doubt, clarify. When in doubt, clarify. That's such a powerful recommendation, and that's really what we want to do today. Clarify. And that's where we are diving into what are those quiet musts, those should rules, those, if then statements that we live by, and we don't even realize them. That's even the most interesting part. Our lives are governed often by rules that are sometimes not even set by us, rules that are inherited by our experiences of other people, or rather the experiences of other people. We, I mean, my wife used to say something to me that I find very striking. I first heard that from her. She always says, don't let other people's experiences become your prophecy. But the interesting thing is that we often do that without even thinking about it so much. So when something happens to someone, we take that as a model of the world. But then let's not digress. Let's go back into, you know, how these rules shape our lives, right? How these rules, in quotes, were supposed to protect us, have now become, a core negative belief that is now what we will refer to in psychotherapy as limiting belief, right? So, really, what are negative assumptions? And that's where we really want to start from. They are statements, for example, that are deeply entrenched in our mind, which, for one, is backed up by certain beliefs. And I'll give you an example. So, we live by certain rules. An example of that rule would be, if I impress others, then I'll get ahead in life. This has been preached from only God knows how long, right? Like, this has been talked about, like, this has been preached from time to time to time to time to time, right? But there is an underlying negative assumption in there, right? Which is that if I impress others, I will get ahead in life. I want you to take a bit of pause and think about that. The danger of this is that it can take this person on a trajectory where they live for others rather than expressing their authentic self. And the conversation around authentic self, it's a complete rabbit hole, which I will maybe take in a different episode and break down. When we ask people to be themselves, to be authentic, what are we really asking them to do? Are we open to accepting them if they choose to be authentic, or are we expecting them to behave in a certain way that is acceptable to us? and therefore we can tag that authentic? That's a question for another day. Another example is I should not let people down. That's an assumption. And one of the biggest, I would call it, phrases that has changed my perspective about life is that it's okay to change your mind after you have committed. It's such a revolutionary thinking that in my journey of self-awareness and having helped my clients walk through that journey, it's been one of the things that have helped individuals to make a drastic change in their life. Because you see people get into relationships, get into business deals, and they are afraid to pull out because they are afraid of disappointing others, even to their own detriment. Another example of a negative assumption is that I must always be in control. You know, this is one of the top ranking sources of stress as far as human history is concerned, because we assume that we have the capacity to control every single outcome of our lives, when nothing can be farther from the truth than this assumption, which is that I must always be in control. It's absolutely impossible to always be in control. You cannot control every single thing in your life. And when you really think about it, how are you able to control the weather? How can you control what the person driving the next car will do when you get out on the road tomorrow morning? You can't. And the problem is that we have not stopped to really question, are these assumptions true? Like, are they things that are really, really true? Are they, or are they just things that I have just picked up and I'm like, wow. So, what I'm successfully doing today is sowing seeds of doubts in those core assumptions. And I'm inviting you to really question them, because all we're doing is to seek for clarity. Where do they come from? How do we get into these particular assumptions? What are the things that, you know this what are the what is the model, what's the origin, where is this assumptions coming from? Now, there are three basic areas where these assumptions are coming from. There are three basic areas that are at the forefront of championing this assumption. One is acceptance. Our fundamental human need for acceptance often leads us in the wrong direction of creating wrong negative assumptions to satisfy our fundamental wiring for acceptance, which is a fundamental human need. If I am not loved, I am not valued. The next is competence. That's the next model in which we build these assumptions. Take, for example, and this affects career, high driven, high impact, high flying people the most. In my work as a therapist, one of the things I have seen to be almost a consistent pattern is the connection between trauma and the excessive drive that high achievers have. Many of them are that driven because they fundamentally believe that they are only as good as what they are able to accomplish. So, if I succeed, then I matter. And it drives them into a painful hole, which says that if they fail, then they are not worth it. And that's the reason why you see high suicide rates among these kinds of people, because they do not even give themselves the opportunity to be human, which is that to be human is to be susceptible to setbacks and failures. So you see, we've talked about acceptance, which is a human driven desire that leads us into negative assumptions. And now we're talking about competence, the need to be competent, which is a natural human desire. But when we do not consciously craft our thinking around that area, we build negative assumptions that does not even serve us. The last but definitely not the least then is control. You know, I think that control, like I said earlier, is one of the biggest form of stressor. It's you know, there is sufficient research to back this up. In my personal practice and in just everyday interactions, you see how much people want to control things that they absolutely cannot have control over. And this is one of the reasons that prevent people from actually accepting help. I can figure it out all by myself. If I ask for help, then I'm a weak person. So I must handle everything myself. I must take care of everyone. And quite frankly, most women fall into this category because there is an unhealthy drive to take care of every single person, have everything in control, be in charge of everything. Whereas in reality, this is completely unachievable. So, these beliefs are very hard to see, especially because they are very much embedded into our everyday life. They're just there. They are, for many of you also listening now, this is the first time you're actually bringing this to your consciousness. And they are often hardwired from our childhood, where our handlers have made us believe that if we behave well, then we will be accepted. If we don't behave well, then we will not be accepted. So it makes us design an unhealthy model around acceptance. And the list can go on and on and on. But is there really hope? And where does healing start? How can we begin to care for ourselves in a way that empowers us to live a more fulfilling life? The first step is really about awareness, which we have talked about. Like, we you know we tend to underestimate the importance and power of awareness. In the hallmark of emotional intelligence, it's a triage. The framework of emotional intelligence teaches you to know yourself, choose yourself, and give yourself. But you cannot jump from knowing yourself to choosing yourself to giving yourself. You must first know yourself. So self-awareness is really very critical. And that's been the starting point and the foundation which we have built in this our conversation from the beginning. Like, I spent time, helping you identify these particular assumptions. So the first thing really is to be aware of it. And being aware is really to listen for those rigid areas where you have rules, the ifs, the musts, the shoulds, the places where you do not have enough flexibility. Then to ask the next question, is this always true? And that brings us to the crux of the conversation today, to ask for clarity, because there is now a lot of doubt, right? I've sown a lot of doubt. It is now time to seek clarity, to say, are this really true? And in the words of my very wise wife, right? Am I making someone else's experience my prophecy? Did I build these models to be acceptable to my handlers and my caregivers? I'm a big boy now, I'm a big girl now. I can take care of myself. So it's okay to relax those roles. It's okay to let them go. It's okay to be a different person. I can choose now. I don't have to be a well behaved child in every sense of the word to accept that I am of value. And so, if there's one thing from today, is to understand that these negative assumptions are old patterns that has led us down the path of survival. They have helped us as coping mechanisms, as survival strategy. And it's time to let that old cloth go, to hang it in the wardrobe and leave it there and move on to a new home. Hmm. These questions, when you ask them, these questions around whose life am I living? Who am I still trying to impress, even when I'm independent? These questions, they don't make you weak. Instead, they really, really set you free. This has been a Better Way produced and distributed by Pax and Kura. And if today's episode resonated with you and you like to explore therapy, please reach out to us through any of our social media handles or send us an email. We'd love to work alongside with you. I'm always excited about the privilege to walk with my client on a journey that will forever transform their lives. Until I see you on the next one, please be kind to yourself. I'm always rooting for you.